1 Timothy chapter 3. In the story of the turtle and the hare, let me ask you this question. Would you consider yourself the turtle or the hare? Are you a person that loves to just go at a speed of light? Or you just kind of go through life slowly and methodically? I was pondering that question. How would I answer that? And my answer would be this. It depends. That there are times that we need to step on the gas and we need to go. Again, speaking of the kids, when they were very small, you've got bibs and you've got high chairs and you've got a whole entourage of baggage that you have to take with you everywhere you go. And we were sitting around the dinner table one time and I thought, if we had a real emergency, we'd never get out. I mean, we got to take everything, including the kitchen sink. So at the time, maybe they remember this, we started what we called jet drills. And we'd be in the middle of dinner and I'd say, okay, jet drill. And that meant we just dropped whatever we were doing. We're going to get in the van. We're going to go somewhere. Now, most of the time we went to the Dairy Queen. So they liked the jet drills. But it was just this idea that if you had something that you needed, you didn't need to take everything. Just get in the van and let's go. There are times you got to step on the gas and you got to train for that. But there are other times when the best route of life is just to kind of slow down and proceed with caution. Circumstances, situations, events usually determine which is the best. Now, in general, I would say that my personality is probably more on the side of the turtle than it is the hare. You can see that in the way I drive. Now, there's some people, they don't even know what a brake is. They just... Others don't know what a gas pedal is. As I get older, I probably will be one of those people. But I usually am more the turtle when it comes to my driving. I'm the turtle when it comes to decisions I make. And I certainly am the turtle when I come to my preaching. You have endured many sermons since I've been here, but I was looking over some of the series that I have preached, and I came in 2013, and my first series with you was James. I only had 14 sermons in that little book. We moved on from there and went through 11 chapters of Genesis, and I looked, and that one was contained into 35 messages. We went to Hebrews and grew into 46 messages, and we just finished Ephesians, that was 53. Now, one of those series that we did was Mark, and Mark is a bigger book, and we were able to kind of condense that down to 78 messages. So, I'm kind of slow and methodical, but I'm the turtle there because I don't ever really plan to go back to preach through Mark or the first part of Genesis or Hebrews. I want to give you what is there so I don't have to go back there and do it again. Because there's 66 books. We want to give attention to what we can. But there are times that we slow down on purpose. It's not that I try to slow us down, but there's sometimes that the passage really encourages us to slow down. That's kind of where we are in 1 Timothy chapter 3. Really, this is our 12th message, and we're starting chapter 3. I feel like, at least, we've been moving at a pretty good clip, fast pace. But when we come to chapter 3, we're going to have to slow down because of the gravity and the weight of what is being discussed. Now, since the beginning of the book, Paul has encouraged Timothy to remain at Ephesus and right the ship. This is a strong church that really has lost its way, and Timothy's there to help correct the trouble that's in the camp. And he's there really to deal with that trouble that tends to stem from poor, unqualified leadership. That's the subject of chapter 3. And it's going to set the standard of what right leadership within the church looks like. So we want to slow down. We want to kind of consider all that Paul is teaching Timothy and just kind of soak up what is laid out for us. So as we begin, let's start with verse 1. Paul tells Timothy, he says, the saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of the overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. Not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. And I want to stop our reading right there. But over the next few weeks, we need to consider really the two offices that are in the church. Those offices are the office of the pastor. The other is the office of the deacon. And today I want to consider really my title this: Ministerial Beginnings. And I just want to look at verse 1. Look at it with me. This saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of the overseer, he desires a noble task. Two things I want to look at this morning: the office of the overseer and the calling of the overseer. Let's start with this, the office of the overseer. Now, for fear that I'm going to be academic, sometimes I go home, like the last time I was here in this book, I went home thinking, man, that was terrible. That was like so academic that you got full weight of doctrine. But you might have gone home thinking, what did he mean? So for fear that I'm going to be too academic, let me start with an illustration. If I needed to hire someone, okay, a job opening, if I need to hire someone, I may post that opening in various sources. I certainly would go to the internet and try to utilize that. I might, depending on what kind of job it is, I might go out to Lebanon Daily News, pull out does anybody read the newspaper anymore? Maybe. Pull out the classified ads, looking for a job. I probably would speak to other people I know and say, hey, I'm looking to hire someone. Here's what I'm looking to do. Spread the word. But before I ever post a position, before I ever list that, I've got to have a title for it. Last year, we were looking for an assistant pastor. Josh, you've been here what? About a year. Praise the Lord for him. But I didn't call Josh up and say, hey, I've got a job opportunity, but I'm not sure what it's going to involve. He wouldn't have come for that. He's got to have a title. He's got to have an understanding of what that's going to be. So we're looking for an assistant pastor, and we give meat to the skeleton of those bones. What does that mean? In many ways, that's what Paul is doing in verse 1 when he talks about the pastor. He's really talking about the title and what it means in the beginning of that title. If anyone aspires to the office of an overseer. Just want to stop right there and define some words. And again, I don't mean to be academic. I apologize if you go home and say, what did that mean? But what is an overseer? We ought to know that. Technically, the Greek word is episkopos. And if we were using a King James, now some of you may have a King James, what you will find is it says, if any man desires the office of a bishop. Now, I don't want to beat that one up because that is one of the translations of that word. But that word can become confusing because of the various denominations we have out there has really made an office or added an office called the bishop. And in their denominational standings, what they do is they generally have various offices for ministry. They'll have a priest or a pastor. He's the guy that's on the local church ministry. I'm a pastor. But in such denominations, there would be someone over me that might have multiple local assemblies, and he might be what maybe someone call a regional director. If you work retail at Hobby Lobby, there's Hobby Lobbies all over the place, and they usually have a general manager of that Hobby Lobby, but then there is a regional director that's over those various Hobby Lobbies of a particular area. When it comes to a church, in some of these denominations, you have a pastor or a priest, and then you have the next level up, a regional director that they have titled bishop. So you have two offices. That can get confusing because the Bible does not have those two offices. And if we're reading the King James translation, we could get confused about what is being meant when it says that a man that desires the office of a bishop. Paul is using the word episkopos, and it really means overseer. Bishop is an overseer. It's someone who looks through and oversees ministry. Now, this word shows up two other times in the New Testament, and you might want to write this down if you're taking notes. But again, sticking with the King James, in Acts chapter 20, verse 17 through 18, Paul is going to send for the elders from Ephesus. Those elders are the presbyteros. Now, again, I tell you, I'm going to get academic here. The presbyteros are the elders. Paul is in Miletus calling for them to come and meet him. And he says in Acts chapter 20, verse 28, he says to them, "Take heed therefore to yourselves and to all the flock over which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers." Episkopos. That's the same word bishop or the same word overseer as we're looking at today. One of the other places that we find this word episkopos is in Titus chapter 1. There Paul says, he tells Titus, "Ordain elders in every city, for the bishop or the episkopos must be blameless." As you're reading through the King James, again, great translation, my encouragement is don't get confused as to what that word means simply because we live in a culture that has two different offices. When we come to the New Testament, what we find is that word bishop or this word overseer is the same word. The Greek is episkopos. He is one who has oversight. But what you've also find is that office or that word is interchangeable with another Greek word, and that Greek word is presbyteros, and that word simply means elder, someone who's giving maturity. So, when we come to this office, what we could say is that an overseer is an elder, someone who gives oversight to the church. Now, I want to give a little bit more confusion. I want to give you another word. There's a third word that really describes this office in the New Testament, and it's an important word because it kind of gives us an understanding of what this office does. That word's not found in 1 Timothy, but it is found throughout the Bible, and that word is the word shepherd, or the Greek term for it is poimen. Okay? You could turn to, you don't have to do this, but you could turn to 1 Peter chapter 5, and Peter says this, "To the elders," the presbyteros, "which are among you, I exhort, who am also an elder," a presbyteros. I'm a witness of the sufferings of Christ and also a partaker of the glory which shall be revealed. Now, verse 2 of 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter now says this, feed the flock of God. That word feed literally is the word shepherd. It's the word poimen. Peter says, feed the flock of God which is among you, taking oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not by filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. What Peter is saying is that you presbyteros, you elders, are to shepherd the flock of God. That word shepherd is our word for pastor. So when we are coming to this passage in 1 Timothy 3, and we are looking at these offices, the offices of pastor, the office of deacon, when we look at ministerial beginnings, what we find is that you're going to come across various titles for this one office. You're going to find the title of a pastor who is an elder, who is also an overseer. Same purpose, same person, same office. But as you read your various translations, I'm bringing this out because you're going to see these terms used interchangeably. That's why you're going to see in the King James the word bishop, and you'll see in the ESV the word overseer. Which one's right? You know what the answer is? Both of them. Because they're interchangeable. Both are correct, and really neither is superior over the other. Don't get caught up on the translations because these words all have interchangeable meanings. But I would say this, in today's culture, I try to shy away from using the word bishop, not because it doesn't have context, but because in our culture, it doesn't mean what Paul meant. Overseer is probably more clear. So, my question, what is an overseer? An overseer is a pastor who shepherds the flock of God. An overseer is a bishop who gives oversight to the flock of God. An overseer is an elder who gives maturity and wisdom to the flock of God. That's where we'll start, okay? The office of the overseer. Let me move on to this. How about the calling of an overseer? Or maybe we could ask this question: how does a pastor come to become a pastor? What is it that makes a pastor a pastor? Does he just open up the classifieds one day and the church is looking for a pastor, and he wakes up and says, you know what? I wonder what it'd be like to be a pastor. So he answers the ad, or he goes on to monster.com, looks for a church, and fills out the application. I mean, is that what a pastor does? It's what I did. No, I'm joking. I didn't do that. Seriously, there is a hiring process when it comes to hiring a man for this particular job. And the candidate has to have, or maybe I should say should have, credentials of seminary. He can't be a novice. He can't be somebody that's untrained. He can't be somebody that's been an unbeliever. There has to be some credentials that he has to hold to. But then you find that there's a church pulpit committee that's formed, and that pulpit committee needs to have open communication with the man, and he should at some point be able to come in and preach to the people and take questions and answers. And I find that most of the time you need to have him preach 2 or 3 times because everybody has one good sermon, right? Have him preach a couple times and let the church see the man's gifts. There is a point of that. But I want to go back even before that. I want to go back to the mechanism that's unseen that's in the man's heart. When does a man come to the point that he even wants to be a pastor? Well, notice verse 1. If any man aspire to the office of an overseer, he desires a noble task. That word aspire means to ambitiously seek something out. It's something that he's pursuing because he thinks it has high value. Now, it's used a few times in the New Testament. Most of the time, it's used in a negative context. Here, it's a good context. Paul says that if you have somebody that is ambitiously pursuing the ministry, the office of an overseer, that's a good thing. But we could turn over, and we'll get there, but we could turn over to chapter 6, and Paul's going to say that same desire, that same ambitious seeking, some people put to the task of acquiring money. They ambitiously seek out for themselves the gaining of wealth. They covet after it. We'll get there and we'll find out what they covet and what happens to them. In Romans chapter 1, Paul uses that same word about ambitiously seeking things out to describe men who improperly have lustful passions for one another. It's used in some contexts to be negative. It's used in some contexts to be positive. But Paul is saying that there is a case that you have a man who's desiring to be a pastor. He will ambitiously seek this office out. And if he does, that's a good thing. Now, it does not mean that he will get it. There are qualifications that he has to meet. And Paul lists some of those qualifications, and we'll go through those. But at least it starts with this desire, this ambitious seeking of this office. And that ambition, Paul says, is good. Now, when it comes to that desire, let's note a few things, okay? Let's note these things I've got on the slide for you. First of all, this is not a mystical experience. There's not a man who went out on his porch one day and looked up the sky and there was words there that said, "Go into the ministry, James." There wasn't a time that he walked out on his porch and the clouds rolled back and he heard trumpets and a voice from heaven that said, "Freddie, go apply for that office." He didn't have a mystical, subjective experience. It's just a simple desire that any of us would have as we process and evaluate what's going on in our heart. I call it the invisible mechanism. My heart gravitates to that. It's not a mystical experience. Another thing we'll say is this: it comes to ordinary people. In Sunday school, we're starting a series on 12 ordinary men. It's a series on the disciples. And they were just ordinary people. There was nothing really special about them. Acts talks about how they're just plain fishermen. They're unlearned men with the Lord. Well, when it comes to men who desire this office of pastor, they're ordinary too. There's nothing special about us. I mean, really, I put my pants on one foot at a time, just like you do. I've never tried it. Maybe I should try it to kind of jump in there. That I might show up with a broken nose or something. I won't do that. But there's nothing special about us. We're just ordinary people. Sometimes we don't always get it right. And sometimes we make bad choices. And sometimes we sin, just like you. But with all of our faults and all of our foibles, we desire to serve the Lord by serving you, His people. It's not a mystical experience. It's not something that's special. It's ordinary. And yet, number 3, this is an office of service. If any man desires with ambition this office because he thinks that it's going to give him power and authority, he needs to go do something else. This is not an office of power and authority. This is an office that really is meant for service. And then you'll note at the end of the verse, if anyone aspires to the office of the overseer, he desires a noble task. It was Chrysostom that said that it's a good work because it helps protect the truth of the gospel. He went on to say it's a good work because it protects the church. That is what he is desiring to do. He's looking to serve God's people because he's looking to serve God, and he's looking to know the mind of God so he can give the mind of God to God's people. Preserving the gospel, protecting the church. It's a good work because it teaches God's people how to grow in the grace and the knowledge of Jesus Christ. Now, I think I've laid enough groundwork to come to some conclusion. Don't look at your watch. Let me back that up. I'll get there. But I think I can make some concluding remarks here that will help us tie in some application. And really, I just have two. Let me start here. When it comes to this office, I think we understand it, but I'll just mention it, that God can call any man he chooses. Maybe even you. Somebody says, well, I'm too old for that. There's been plenty of older men that have gone into the ministry. Somebody says, well, I'm too young for that. There's been plenty of men that have gone into ministry as they've grown up. I mean, I think Spurgeon was like 16 when he took his first church. I wouldn't recommend that. But he did. God can call any man he chooses. And he may call you. Because God gives men the desire for this office. It is God-given. Think about our time when we were in Ephesians. We got to Ephesians chapter 4 and we read those words that he gave some to be apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers. God gives a man the desire for this office. And he does it, again, Ephesians 4, so that that man will build up the church and equip the saints to go out and do the work of the ministry. That you have a sphere of influence, and you're going to see people this week that I'll never meet, and you'll know people that I'll never know, and yet that is your vineyard. Your little place where you can work and encourage people with the Word of God. It is the pastor who's equipping you with knowing the Word so that you can go out and you can serve Him. God is the one who gives that desire to men. And then He takes that desire and grows those men to teach them how to help you in your ministry and service for Him. So if you are here and you have that desire, you have that ambition, don't neglect that. Pursue it. I would say don't shun it or resist it. Pursue it with ambition because that may be what He has for you. Proverbs 16:9. Man devises his ways, but what happens? The Lord directs his steps. It may be that we have someone that will stand up and say, I feel like the Lord would have me to be a pastor. I feel like the Lord would have me preach. If we had somebody to do that, what would we do in such a case? I would hope that we do not dismiss them for such a statement. And there are some people that may. I mean, I would hope that we do not do that. I would not think that we would do it. But I have heard sometimes people say, I want to preach. And people have said, what do you know? As if they're discrediting that desire that they can't learn anything. Or sometimes we may look at them and say, oh, you can't be a preacher, because I remember when I was changing your diaper in the nursery, and we never see those children grow out of the nursery and grow up to be adults. Sometimes I think of the Lord when He says a prophet's not without honor except in his own. I wonder if it's because they still remember that little guy running around. I hope that if somebody said, I feel like I want to pursue the ministry. We would not say, what do you know? Or you're too young for that. Or I think Kevin Mayfield ran into this down in Ecuador, that you don't have a degree, that somehow a piece of paper on the wall qualified such men for that. I think that's one of the reasons he even has that Bible Institute, that he can give a certificate to those men so that they'll be accepted into their culture. I would hope that we would not be negative to someone. I would hope that if we had somebody say, I want to preach, we would encourage that. Now, it may be that he has that desire fade. And it may be that later on he gets in life or college and he says, I feel like God would have me do something else. And that's okay. That's fine too. Because Paul says that it starts out with an ambition, a desire, something to pursue. And if you'd pursue something else, that's fine. Men are not failures because they start off on a track of ministry and end up doing something else. Really, God's too big to pin down as if that guy's a failure. God's going to use him in other places if he's faithful. But if we have someone who says, I feel as if I've got this desire, I feel as if God's given me that gift, maybe it's you. And if that's your desire, pursue it. Run it down with all of your might. Now, there'll be qualifications to meet, and we'll have to talk through some of those. There's going to be things that you'll have to learn, training to gain, but pursue that desire. Seek the Lord, because He may be developing you. Now, my second point of application really deals with us as a church. If we had someone who felt called into the ministry, how would we know? What kind of measure would we give to somebody that says, I feel called to the ministry? How would the church respond to that? Let me give you a few. How would the church know God's calling upon a man? I would say first, take note of his attendance to church services. And I'm not talking about, the morning service. I mean, even the fringe people come to the morning service. But is he faithful? Does he make it to Sunday school? Does he come on Wednesday nights when we have Sunday night services? Does he come to that? Does he make other services? Or is he just kind of like a Sunday morning only kind of guy? One man said, you want to start with people who are already showing an active commitment to the ministry and model that commitment to the body. That's the guy that you want. He says, I want to serve the Lord, but he's never here. Or you want to serve the Lord and he's always here. It's easier to put a man that desires and a commitment that works than to stir up apparent lack of desire. How would you know? First of all, take note of his attendance. Is he faithful? Secondly, I'd say this. Note men who have already appeared to be shepherding other people, though they don't have the title of this office. I mean, here are people who are on their own time, their own resources. They're out visiting people of the church. They're out discipling people in the church, visiting in their own home. They're giving counsel to people that are in the church. I mean, they're teaching maybe, and they're doing it well. I mean, look for somebody that's already shepherding ministers and ministering the word. Look out for men who are eager to serve the Lord because they're already serving their fellow brethren. That's something to mark out and notice, because they're naturally doing it. I'd say this. Third, note those who are showing respect and trust to the existing leadership. I have recently described the office of a pastor as that of a general practitioner. If I go to the doctor, what's he going to do? He's going to bring me in the office. He's going to be late. And he's going to walk in, and he's going to have a chart, or he's going to computer and he says, "Hi, how are you today? Okay." And he's going to grab that ear thing. I would love to look through that ear thing one time. I'd love to see what they see. But they always take it, they always put it in your ear, they come back over here, they bump your elbow, they crack your knee, and they take your blood. They do an evaluation. What do they most of the time say to you? "Well, you look pretty good, but you need to do what?" What are the two things they usually say? Lose weight and what? Exercise. You got my doctor. You know what a general practitioner usually gives? Advice. He says, lose weight and exercise. I go out the door and I choose whether I want to believe him or not. Right? I can give a million reasons. I can't exercise. I can't lose weight. I can't do this or that or the other. But really it comes down to my choice. I'm either going to listen to his advice or I'm not. Now let's say I go back next year and he looks at my, he taps and looks and all that, and he gets my blood work and he goes, "Oh no." You don't want to hear a doctor say, "Oh no." But he looks at that blood work and he says, "There's some serious things going on here. I think I'm going to need to send you to a specialist." Okay? "I think you need to lose weight. I think you need to exercise, but I'm going to send you to a specialist." Are you going to go to that specialist? No longer is he giving you advice because you are now desperate. I don't want something to happen to me. So that advice now just turned to something important. And I go to the specialist, and the specialist looks at my blood work and he says, "Yeah, that looks pretty bad. If you don't change, something really worse is going to happen. But I think you can really change it if you'll do what? Diet and exercise." No longer is that specialist giving advice. He's giving a prescription. And if I don't want those dire things to happen, I'm going to take his word as gospel. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to exercise. When it comes to a pastor, he's often seen as the general practitioner. Pastor will listen to a guy comes into his office and says, "Oh, pastor, I got this, that, and the other." And he might say, "Well, you know what? You need to read your Bible, or you need to find, this or that or the other." And he'll give. And that person that walks out of that office will have to decide on his advice. But what you find is when he doesn't act on that, and a year, 2 or 3 years later, there's real trouble, and now he has to go to a Bible counselor. That Bible counselor will say the same thing that general practitioner pastor gave him. But all of a sudden now, sin has made life so bad, he's desperate. When it comes to men who desire the office of a pastor, how do they view existing leadership? Do they view him as a guy, good old guy? There's Pastor Brian. I don't mind. But does he respect and listen? Because good old Pastor Brian is looking out for the man's soul. We have to be careful of that. And one of the ways we know if a man's really called to ministry, how does he respect the authority? How do we look at authority? A man will not lead well until he first shows himself able to follow and submit to his present leaders who are above him. I'll move on to my last one here. A church can know and the evidence as it patiently notes the man and his life over time. many occasions, you watch these children grow up, right? Will your children ever make mistakes? Will they ever make mistakes? I know a family, now this is going back decades, but I know a family, the kids were very tiny. Mom went to take her shower, and the kids decided to open up the pantry door, and they climbed up on the shelves, and they got the flour, and they dumped it on the floor, and they made snow angels on the kitchen floor while Mom's taking a shower. Do you think Mom was happy about that? I don't know that I'd call that sin. Kids will do dumb stuff. You can clean up that mess. But will kids ever make mistakes? What do you think? Absolutely they will. Will they ever do dumb things like snow angels with a flower? Absolutely they will. Will children sin? Absolutely they will. But will they mature? Hopefully they will. And as we are gracious to them, what we may find is that God is calling them to this high office called pastor. And in that day, we need to encourage them. Because we've seen them make mistakes, and we've seen them even sin and be repentant of that sin. We've seen them grow and mature. And we're no longer badgering them about how their little cheeks were so big and we used to love to pinch them, or whatever we used to do when they were 6 and 8 and 10. We've had a long run to watch them grow up in the grace and knowledge of Christ. And in such cases, we need to encourage them to stir up that work that the Lord may be doing in them, because this is a valuable office. And its beginning starts in the heart. Now, you may be here and God's not giving you the desire. That's okay. That's okay. Be supportive of your church. Be faithful to your church. Be supportive of those who God's using and dealing with. And watch out for those in the church that you may eventually be able to come and say, you know what? God may be having you in the ministry. You may be one that just encourages them, that God's maybe calling you for more. And that is a good thing. If God's not called you with that desire, no worries. But you be faithful. May encourage us all to edify each other, to give a spiritual help to everyone who comes our way, that we all may grow in the grace and knowledge of Christ.